the metal the world forgot until it started running out. For decades, silver has been treated as the forgotten metal, a relic, a cheap alternative to gold, a shiny souvenir sold in coin shops and gemstone markets. But here's the truth almost no one understands. Silver isn't a precious metal. It's a strategic material, and the modern world cannot function without it. Not AI, not satellites, not guided missiles, not electric vehicles, not solar power, nothing. Because silver does something no other metal on Earth can do. It conducts electricity better than copper. It reflects light better than aluminum. It kills bacteria without chemicals. And it does all of this simultaneously. That combination is impossible to replicate, which is why every technological revolution of the past 150 years, photography, electronics, computing, clean energy, has quietly consumed more and more of the world's silver. But today, the quiet part isn't quiet anymore. For the 5th year in a row, global silver consumption has exceeded global silver mining, not by a little, by hundreds of millions of ounces. We are burning through the world's physical silver faster than we can pull it out of the ground. Inventories are being drained. National stockpiles are shrinking. Solar manufacturers are scrambling for supply. And for the first time in modern history, industrial demand is colliding with geological limits. This isn't a temporary imbalance. It isn't a supply chain glitch. It isn't a pandemic aftershock. It's the beginning of something much larger, a long-term structural shortage baked into the physics of modern technology and the economics of mining itself. And here's the part investors always misunderstand. When deficits happen in oil, the price rises. When deficits happen in wheat, the price rises. But when deficits happen in a metal that the global economy cannot substitute, and that is already priced far below its strategic value, prices don't just rise, they reprice violently. We are approaching that moment, a point where silver must double, even triple, simply to bring supply and demand back into equilibrium. A point where industries compete against each other for the same shrinking pool of physical metal. A point where the world realizes that the cheapest strategic resource of the 20th century is becoming the scarcest of the 21st. But to understand how we reached this impossible shortage, why supply cannot increase, and why technology itself is accelerating the collapse, we need to rewind back to the centuries when silver-powered empires funded wars and triggered collapses long before modern industry existed. Because the pattern we are living through today has happened before, just never on a global scale, when silver built empires and destroyed them. To understand today's silver shortage, you have to return to a world that looked nothing like ours. A world where silver wasn't optional, wasn't decorative, wasn't an investment. It was power. 500 years ago, silver sat at the center of the global economy. It funded armies, toppled dynasties, and rewired trade between East and West. It became the bloodstream of empires. And when the bloodstream thinned, the empires collapsed. The pattern starts in the 1500s, when Spanish ships crossed the Atlantic and discovered the mountain of Potosi in modern-day Bolivia. They didn't just find a mine, they found the economic engine that would power Spain for almost a century. The silver extracted from Potosi flowed into Europe, then into Asia, where China, the world's manufacturing superpower of its time, demanded silver in exchange for silk, ceramics, and tea. Silver wasn't just valuable, it was the global reserve asset. Nations fought not for territory, but for mints, mines, and monopolies on silver flow. But there was a hidden flaw that empires refused to see. Silver demand was infinite, silver supply was not. Every empire that relied on silver eventually pushed its mines beyond their limits. Spain drained Potosi so aggressively that output collapsed. Japan exhausted its native silver deposits by the 1600s. Even China, consuming more silver than any other civilization in history, struggled with shortages that triggered tax crises, rebellions, and the eventual fall of the Ming dynasty. The cycle was always the same. A surge in technology or trade increased demand. Mines ramped up production until they couldn't. Supply peaked, demand didn't, and the system cracked. Fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, electricity turned silver from a monetary metal into a technological metal. Telegraph wires, early cameras, chemical processes, all required silver. And just like the empires before them, industrial nations burned through their reserves, assuming more silver would always be available. It wasn't. By the early 20th century, the United States Geological Survey was already warning that silver would become strategically scarce. Not because the world would run out, but because the grade of ore was falling. Mines had to dig deeper, process more rock, and spend more energy for the same ounce of metal. History had repeated itself, just more quietly. But what's happening today is something different. Something no empire, no industrial power, no generation of humanity has ever experienced. For the first time in history, silver is being consumed not just by millions, but by billions. Not just by trade, but by technology. Not just by civilizations, but by entire systems that cannot function without it. And that shift from historical scarcity to structural scarcity begins the modern crisis. The modern world turned silver into a fuel, then burned through it faster than ever. By the time the 20th century arrived, silver had already shaped empires, funded wars, and redrawn the map of global trade. But what happened next was far more dramatic. Silver stopped being a monetary metal. It became infrastructure. And once silver entered the bloodstream of modern industry, the pace of consumption changed forever. The first shock came in the early 1900s. Photography, the most important information technology of its era, ran entirely on silver halides. Every photograph, every reel of film, every newspaper image required silver. By the 1930s, photography alone consumed over 1/3 of global silver production. For the first time, silver wasn't being hoarded by empires. It was being burned. Then came electronics. When the transistor was invented in 1947, few understood what it would unleash. Radios, early computers, televisions, and circuit boards required tiny amounts of silver, but multiplied by millions of units, then tens of millions, then billions. The consumption curve began to tilt upward. And something else was happening beneath the surface, something far more dangerous. The world was running out of easy silver. For centuries, miners extracted silver from rich, high-grade deposits, ore with 1,000 grams per ton, 500 grams per ton, sometimes more. But by the mid-20th century, those deposits were nearly gone. Ore grades fell, depths increased, cost per ounce climbed relentlessly. And then came the paradox that defines silver's crisis today. Most silver is not mined for silver. Over 60% of global production comes as a byproduct of mining other metals, copper, zinc, lead, gold, which means even if the world desperately needs more silver, miners cannot simply dig more to increase silver output. They would need global demand for copper or zinc to explode, something that economics simply will not deliver. The price of silver can triple, but if copper prices don't follow, mines will not expand. It is the most dangerous bottleneck you can have, a strategically essential metal whose supply is not controlled by its own market. By the 1980s and 1990s, another technological wave arrived, one that would accelerate the crisis beyond anything in human history. Solar photovoltaics, semiconductors, automotive electronics, medical equipment, lithium-ion batteries, missile guidance systems, high-efficiency motors. Each one demanded silver. Each one grew exponentially. Each one increased dependence on a material with declining ore grades and rigid supply constraints. But the real inflection point, the moment the system tipped, came when digital technology collided with energy transition. AI servers require silver-laced circuitry. 5G antennas use silver-coated components. Electric vehicles use up to 50 or 60 grams of silver per car. Solar panels use silver paste that cannot yet be replaced without sacrificing efficiency. When billions of devices, millions of vehicles, and hundreds of gigawatts of solar power begin competing for the same finite metal, the outcome isn't a mystery, it is mathematics. Silver consumption began exceeding mining supply. Inventories started draining. Above-ground reserves, once thought to be abundant, fell to multi-decade lows. For the first time in recorded economic history, we entered a world where silver demand was compounding exponentially, while silver supply was peaking. This is the core dynamic no policy, no subsidy, no technological optimism can escape. Technology doesn't solve the silver shortage. Technology accelerates it. And by the time the world realized what was happening, we were already 5 years into consecutive deficits, a structural shortfall that no mining company on Earth could simply dig out of. 5 years of deficit when the system quietly slips into crisis. The modern silver crisis didn't begin with headlines. It didn't begin with a geological discovery. It didn't begin with a sudden surge in price. It began with a number that almost nobody paid attention to. For the 5th consecutive year, the world consumed more silver than it produced in any other commodity. A deficit triggers immediate panic. Oil deficits cause energy shocks. Copper deficits shut down manufacturing. Agricultural deficits trigger food inflation, but silver deficits, they were dismissed as temporary. A rounding error, a market quirk that would normalize. Except it didn't normalize, it deepened. Let's break it down with cold, mechanical clarity. The deficit mathematics. In a normal year, global mining produces roughly 840 million ounces of silver. But global demand, industrial, jewelry, investment, solar has surged past 1.1 billion ounces. The gap? Hundreds of millions of ounces every year. Where did the extra silver come from? Not from new mines, not from increased production, not from recycling. It came from one place: inventories. The above-ground stockpile built over decades, and those inventories are now collapsing. Industry reports show registered silver on major exchanges falling to their lowest levels in more than 20 years. At the same time, sovereign stockpiles, once held quietly by governments as strategic reserves, have been drawn down to almost nothing. This isn't a market fluctuation, it's depletion. The system is eating itself. The choke points. Why can't supply rise to meet demand? Because silver sits at the intersection of 4 structural constraints. Byproduct trap. Over 60% of silver is mined as a byproduct. You cannot increase silver production unless copper, zinc, or lead production increases. Those industries are not expanding, and some are shrinking. Declining ore grades. The average grade of silver ore has fallen for 100 years. Mines now process more rock, burn more energy, and produce fewer ounces. Slow mine development. From discovery to production, a new mine takes 8 to 15 years. Technology is growing exponentially. Mining cannot keep pace. Industrial demand is non-negotiable. Solar manufacturers cannot choose to use less silver. Semiconductors cannot substitute it without losing conductivity. Defense systems cannot replace it without compromising reliability. This is not optional demand, it is structural demand. The impact no one can ignore. Here is the economic truth that policymakers avoid saying out loud. A sustained multi-year deficit means the price of silver is wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. Silver at current prices implies abundance. Reality shows scarcity. To restore balance, one of two things must happen. Either supply doubles, which is geologically impossible in the near term, or price rises enough to force demand destruction, which is economically inevitable. How much must the price rise? Analysts who understand mining economics point to a brutal conclusion. Silver must double simply to bring marginal mines online. Silver must triple if solar and EV demand grows as forecast, and if AI, semiconductors, and defense expansion continue accelerating. The repricing will not be linear. It will be a shock. Because the world has built an energy transition, a digital economy, and a military infrastructure on top of a metal that is increasingly scarce and structurally underpriced, we are now past the point where more mining can solve the deficit. The system is too large, too hungry, too dependent. The imbalance is locked in, and the question that remains is not whether silver will reprice, but how violently the repricing will occur once investors realize what industry already knows: why this silver crisis is unlike any shortage in history. For centuries, silver shortages followed a predictable pattern: a surge in demand, a decline in ore quality, and eventually, supply caught up, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. That's how it used to work. But this time, the cycle is broken because today's shortage isn't driven by empires, currencies, or trade routes. It's driven by technology, and technology doesn't plateau. It compounds. The first accelerator, energy transition. The single largest consumer of silver today isn't jewelry, coins, or photography. It's solar energy. Every solar panel requires silver paste to conduct electricity. No silver, no photovoltaic effect. No photovoltaic effect, no solar industry. This is where the crisis becomes unavoidable. In 2010, solar consumed 150 million ounces of silver. Today, it consumes well over 200 million ounces. By 2030, projections show demand approaching 350 million ounces. That means solar alone could devour 1/3 of all silver mined on Earth every year. And here's the part governments never mention in climate policy. There is no industrial-scale substitute for silver in high-efficiency solar panels. Copper and aluminum don't work. Graphene is experimental. Every attempt to reduce silver content has already hit its physical limit. This isn't optimization. This is dependency. The second accelerator, electrification of everything electric vehicles. Once a niche experiment, are now the backbone of global manufacturing strategy. Each EV uses 25-60 grams of silver, depending on design. Multiply that across tens of millions of cars, electrified buses and trucks, charging infrastructure, autonomous sensors and processors, and you get a demand profile that dwarfs anything seen in previous technological eras. Oil can be replaced by solar, wind, hydrogen, but silver, there is no replacement for the metal that carries the electrons. The third accelerator, AI and defense systems. AI is invisible, but the machines that run it are not. Data centers require silver-coated switches, high-performance servers, thermal interfaces, and ultra-efficient power systems. When an AI cluster consumes as much electricity as a small city, every fractional gain in conductivity matters. Defense is even more extreme. Missile guidance systems, radar, satellites, and secure communications rely on silver films and contacts. A single advanced missile can contain more silver than an entire 1950s automobile, and militaries do not bargain for lower efficiency. They demand perfection at any price. The fourth accelerator, the byproduct wall. This is the constraint that breaks the model entirely. Even if silver demand doubles, miners cannot double supply. Why? Because 2/3 of the world's silver comes from copper, zinc, and lead mines. Unless demand for those metals explodes, which it won't, silver output remains capped. This is not an elastic commodity. This is a trapped commodity, and we are now colliding with that trap at full speed. The result, a crisis unlike any other history has seen silver shortages, but never a global economy built on technologies that cannot function without it. Never a world where billions of devices, millions of vehicles, and entire energy grids compete for the same finite metal. Never a moment where the very structure of modern life depends on a resource whose supply curve is geologically immovable. This is not a cycle, it's an acceleration, and accelerations don't slow down, they break things. When a strategic metal runs out, the price doesn't rise, it resets. Every economic breakdown begins the same way, a quiet imbalance that compounds until the system beneath it finally snaps. Silver is now at that point, 5 years of deficits, inventories collapsing, technologies accelerating demand faster than mining can possibly respond, a byproduct supply chain that cannot expand, even if prices double. The world built its digital and clean energy future on a metal it assumed was abundant. That assumption is gone. Here is the truth the market is slowly being forced to confront. Silver cannot return to equilibrium at today's prices. The mathematics makes it impossible to rebalance the system. Either the world stops building solar panels, EVs, AI servers, satellites, and autonomous sensors, which will not happen, or silver undergoes a repricing event, not a rally, but a structural reset. Investors imagine a gradual climb, but strategic commodities do not move gradually when they run out. They jump violently because price becomes the only mechanism left to ration scarcity. Look at the scale of the divergence. Hundreds of millions of ounces missing annually. Solar consumption still exploding. EV and AI infrastructure entering their steepest growth curves. Defense systems absorbing more silver per unit than ever before. This is not a temporary shortage. It is structural exhaustion. And deeper still lies the factor no one can escape. The world does not know how much high-grade silver is left, but it knows there is far less than before. Ore grades keep falling. New discoveries are rare. Most future projects are deeper, poorer, and slower to bring online. Mining timelines stretch a decade or more, but demand compounds every year. The unavoidable conclusion follows. Silver must rise to a price that forces the global economy to ration itself through cost, not policy. A price where low-value uses disappear. A price where only essential technologies compete for supply. A price high enough to justify new mines, even the expensive ones. Double is conservative. Triple is realistic. More is entirely possible once the world realizes how little physical silver remains. Because silver is no longer powering one empire or one industry. It is powering energy, computation, transportation, communication, defense, medicine, the entire architecture of modern civilization. And modern civilization is running out. The shortage isn't the forecast, it's a condition. The repricing isn't speculation, it's the only mathematical endpoint left. This is the pattern, this is the cycle, and we are already in it.